Before I became someone's wife, I was a different woman entirely, one the world never really met. Back then, I lived in a small house at the edge of the city, where the streets were narrow, the air was always dusty, and dreams often dissolved before they reached the sky. I was 22, freshly graduated, and full of unspoken hopes. My parents had raised me to be sensible, obedient, and quiet, like many girls in my neighborhood. But beneath the surface, I was restless. I craved something more than routine prayers, weekend family visits, and matrimonial ads in the local newspaper. Craved a story, my own story. That's when I got my first job. It wasn't glamorous, just a receptionist at a mid-sized design firm. But to me it was freedom. Every morning I wore my best clothes, fixed my hair just right, and took the bus downtown feeling like a character in someone else's film. That's where I first saw him. His name was Adeel. He wasn't flashy or loud. He wore simple clothes, often came in late, and always had earphones dangling from his collar. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention, but that's exactly why he caught mine. He worked in the graphics department, and on my second week, he asked me where the cafeteria was. That's all it took. One question turned into two. A smile turned into a habit. Soon, I found myself waiting for those accidental run-ins. Adeel had this quiet confidence, a way of speaking that made the world around me slow down. He wasn't like the boys my parents wanted me to marry. He didn't ask about my cooking, my family's property, or my plans to settle. He asked about my favorite books, my dreams, my opinions. No one had ever asked me those things before. At home, I remained the same dutiful daughter, setting the table, folding laundry, listening to my mother's warnings about being too modern. But inside something had changed. I began writing in a journal again. I started noticing music lyrics. I started believing that maybe, just maybe, my story wouldn't follow the same script as everyone else's. Still, I kept everything hidden. Ours wasn't a declared relationship. Not yet. It was a delicate thread, not strong enough to hold weight, but too precious to ignore. Looking back now, I wonder if I was already falling in love or simply in love with the idea of being seen. All I knew then was that someone finally looked at me like I was more than a future wife. And in that quiet recognition, I felt alive. But I had no idea then that the same thread connecting us would one day unravel everything I believed. Adeel and I never officially crossed the line. Not in a way anyone could see. But something invisible had already tied us together. A rhythm in our conversations, a comfort in our silences. Over time, our casual moments turned into intentional ones. He'd wait for me near the lobby when my shift ended, walk me to the bus stop, and sometimes offer tea at the roadside stall around the corner. We talked about everything and nothing. How crowded the city was getting, his favorite childhood memories, my fear of not being enough. With him, I didn't have to perform. I could laugh without being self-conscious, share my thoughts without fearing judgment. He listened, really listened. And in a world where most people only saw the surface, Adeel made me feel like I mattered. It wasn't long before I began rearranging my day around him. Adeel became the secret center of my universe. I picked clothes I thought he might like. I'd rehearse stories I wanted to tell him. Every text from him lit up something inside me that I didn't know existed. His presence was like a soft song I didn't want to end. But something about him remained just out of reach. He never talked about his family. He avoided discussing the future. When I'd ask personal questions, he'd deflect with a joke or change the subject. At first, I took it as mystery, part of his charm. But slowly, a strange unease crept in. I told myself I was overthinking it. After all, didn't love mean accepting someone as they are? Still, I began noticing patterns. He never answered calls in front of me. Once, when I called him late at night, someone else picked up and immediately hung up. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off with a laugh. "Probably my cousin messing with my phone," he said casually. But his eyes didn't quite match his smile. I wanted to believe him. Desperately. I had already built a version of him in my heart. A man who saw me, respected me, cherished me. And I wasn't ready to let go of that image. So I stayed quiet, ignored the unease, and clung to the version of our story I had fallen in love with. He never told me he loved me, not in words. But there were moments that felt louder than declarations. The way he looked at me when I was laughing. The way he'd stand protectively beside me when the street got too crowded. The way his voice softened when he said my name. But love, I've learned, can sometimes disguise itself in silence. And sometimes, the words left unsaid carry the heaviest truths. Still, in those fleeting moments it felt real. Felt like something that could last. And that belief was the beginning of everything that would later fall apart. It began with a voice I didn't recognize. One evening, Adeel left his phone on the reception desk while he stepped away. It buzzed once, then again. I glanced at the screen instinctively. The contact name read John. My heart paused. It wasn't jealousy. It was something deeper. A woman's name wouldn't have bothered me. But John was different. Intimate, deliberate. No one saved a number like that by accident. I told myself to look away. But curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of me. I opened the message. Miss you already. Last night felt like old times. Felt like the ground shifted beneath me. I didn't confront him right away. Couldn't. My hands trembled the entire day. My chest felt tight, like I was breathing through a locked door. I played every moment we'd shared in my mind, questioning if it had all been a performance. Was I ever anything more than a distraction? That night I finally called him. What's wrong? He asked, his voice smooth, calm, too calm. I told him I saw the message. I told him it hurt. For the first time I didn't hold back. There was a long silence. Then he sighed. You shouldn't have looked at my phone, he said, his tone now distant. That was his response. Not denial. Not regret. Just blame. I asked him who she was. Someone I've known for a long time, he replied. It's complicated. Complicated. That word echoed in my ears like a slow, deliberate betrayal. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer explanations. Instead, he told me I was overreacting, that I was reading too much into things. The same man who once noticed every shift in my mood now dismissed my heartbreak as insecurity. The next few days were a blur. I stopped going to work. I deleted his number. I cried until the tears stopped coming. I didn't eat much. I didn't speak much. My mother thought I was just tired from work. How could I tell her that the first person I ever loved had erased me without warning? In the quiet of those days, I realized something painful. He had never promised me anything, not in words. But I had still built a future around him. A future made of glances, of gestures, of assumed meanings. And when it crumbled, I had no one to blame but myself. I had loved him in silence. And he had broken me in silence too. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that I had ignored the signs. That I had chosen hope over truth. And in doing so, I lost the version of myself I thought was finally alive. Time passed. But it didn't heal everything. Healing didn't come wrapped in poetry or grand realizations. It came in quiet decisions. Getting out of bed when I didn't want to, answering my mother when she called my name, showing up to work with swollen eyes and pretending nothing had happened. I didn't share what I went through. Not with friends. Not even with my diary. It was easier to bury it than relive it. Eventually I left that job. I needed distance. From the building, from the memories, from the version of me who had once believed love could never lie. For a while, I walked through life like a shadow of myself. Trust felt like a broken mirror. Dangerous to touch, impossible to piece together. I met suitors, nodded politely, smiled when required. But inside I was guarded. I had learned the difference between being seen and being understood. And I wasn't willing to make the same mistake again. Then came Hamza. He wasn't like Adeel. He didn't have that quiet charm or mysterious energy. Hamza was kind in a practical, grounded way. He listened but didn't prod. He gave space but stayed close. There were no fireworks, no dizzying romance. Just steady conversations, shared values, and a calm I hadn't known I needed. When he proposed, I hesitated. Not because I didn't like him, but because I feared the past would follow me into the future. But something about his presence felt safe. And for the first time in a long while, safe felt enough. I never told Hamza about Adeel. Not because I was hiding something, but because it no longer needed to be spoken. That chapter had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me. On the day of my wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl I used to be. The girl who once believed that love was meant to feel like magic, who mistook silence for depth, who trusted too quickly. I had become someone new, stronger, quieter, wiser. People often talk about their first love as something sacred, something pure. Mine wasn't. It was flawed and painful. But it taught me the cost of believing in half-formed promises and romantic illusions. Before I became a wife, I learned what it meant to lose. Not just someone else, but a part of myself. And in that loss, I discovered a kind of clarity I never had before. Now, when I sit beside Hamza at dinner, or when he hands me tea without being asked, I don't look for sparks. I look for peace. Because sometimes the loudest kind of love is the one that whispers, "You're safe now." And though I never told this story out loud before, it lives within me. Quietly, truthfully. Just like the girl I used to be.